Hey entrepreneurs and website owners, if you're ready to take your online presence to the next level, you need a reliable web host, and that's where HostGator comes in. HostGator is your one-stop solution for easy, affordable, and powerful web hosting. Whether you're launching a blog, an online store, or anything in between, HostGator's got you covered. Don't miss out on creating the website you've always wanted. Visit MilwaukeeMafia.com/HostGator today and let your online journey begin.
You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
And Gavin, we are back again. And if I remember right, are we on our last 1965 episode?
Wow, you are correct.
Pretty sharp, huh?
Yeah, you're on it today. Yes, that is correct.
So what are we talking about?
Well, so to the average listener, this is going to be a throwaway episode. I'm going to freely admit it right now. It's a throwaway episode for most people. But what I've noticed over the last however long is I tend to get more emails when I do the episodes that are about people, about lesser known people. And so we have a lesser known person today. And I suspect that to the right person, this could be one of their more favorite episodes.
But to the average person,
the average person would be like, who is this? Why do I care? But, you know, whatever. So we'll see.
So before you judge the episode, just remember, it might not be for you. It might be for that person that is related to this person.
Right. And and honestly, I think that's how all the episodes are to some degree. I mean, not every episode is for everybody. And that's just how it is.
Yep.
You know, and that's the beauty of a free podcast. If you don't like it 1 week, come back next time. So this is about Ray Matera. And I don't know if Matera is how you say his name. His nickname was Squeaky, so I'm going to call him Squeaky instead of mispronouncing his name the whole time.
I think Squeaky is a great name.
It is. It is actually a really great name. And so I made a little note to myself on here. There isn't anything necessarily about him that makes him stand out compared to maybe other people in his circle, but he kind of popped up in 1965. He was investigated and just kind of rounding out our 1965, looking into him. So, yeah, like I said, many people who listen will be like, why this guy? But he was looked into, and therefore he's going to get covered. So, Raymond Squeaky Matera, was born in Kenosha in September 1920. He was raised in Kenosha. He attended Kenosha public schools. Very Kenosha.
Okay. So does he when he's for the stories we're going to cover? Is he a Kenosha guy at this point?
He's a Kenosha guy.
Okay, he is going to be a Kenosha guy. Or?
Yes. In September 1942, he joined the 8th Air Force. He allegedly served in Normandy, England, France, Germany, as well as the Asiatic, African, and Middle Eastern theaters. That's what his obituary claims. That
sounds like a heck of a resume, man.
Yeah, now I don't know. People who are more knowledgeable about the Air Force and about World War II can definitely jump in on that. But I always thought you either went to the European theater or the Asian theater. I didn't feel like you usually went to both.
Yeah, well, it depends. I mean, you could do... how long was he in the military for?
I don't know, 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, that seems really weird to me, but again, I don't even understand the Air Force. I only understand the Navy, but that would be unusual for a person in the Navy, I would say.
Yeah. But apparently, he was in Normandy, England, France. Well, Normandy and France is kind of redundant, but Germany, Asiatic, African, and Middle Eastern, really getting around, if that's true. He was discharged in October 1945. Came back, and the first time he really pops up in the news is as a gambler. This is going to be a running theme. He's a gambler. He's one of the gambling guys. In March 1949, police raided the Kenosha Athletic Club, which contained a gambling operation. The operator was Frank Greco, known as Ditchy. His nickname is Ditchy. Which is also a cool nickname.
This is like the episode of cool nicknames.
Yeah. He received the biggest fine of $500. The 4 people identified as employees in the gambling operation got fines of $50 each, and then 18 people were fined $5 each just for being there. Most of the people were not notable, but I thought it was interesting that of the people arrested for being there just as gamblers, 3 of them have the same last name. One of them is Squeaky, but the other 2 are guys named Marvin and Anthony. And Marvin and Anthony are brothers, but they are not related to Squeaky, which is weird because it's not a super common last name. But all in all, when this raid went down, 77 people were arrested.
Holy cow.
This is a major gambling operation out of the athletic club. Fines were only given to people who had previous gambling records, which is why only 18 gamblers got fined. Because apparently the police decided if you already had been caught for gambling before, we'll give you a fine. If not, we'll write down your name so we know.
Next time you get caught, you're going to get a fine.
Yeah, but we'll let you go.
I'm curious because, and maybe I just don't remember this right, but it seems like the significant gambling stories that we've done have mainly been in Kenosha and Racine. Was gambling just rampant in these 2 cities as opposed to Milwaukee, that all the significant stories happen in those cities? Or is that just kind of the way the timeline has fallen at this point?
I would suspect more of the timeline. There's definitely operations in Milwaukee.
Because we haven't really done an episode of a significant operation in Milwaukee, have we?
Probably not.
Okay. That's coming yet?
Yeah, I mean, the things that come to mind for me, and actually it'd be a similar, because this raid is 1949. In the 1940s in Milwaukee, there was the Ogden Social Club, and the Ogden Social Club was a big gambling operation, and there were similar things going on. There was also what was called Policy, which is sort of like a really low-level lottery that was going on. So it's not unique to Kenosha.
Okay.
And I would suspect even later on, Kenosha's going to get more coverage. But this always comes back to the thing that Kenosha's like on the state line. So if you're like, this is right now, 1949, that's pre-FBI. But once FBI gets involved in researching and arresting people for gambling, Kenosha becomes, one of those spots because all you got to do is call a guy in Zion and be like, hey, I want to place a bet.
Right.
And you've broken the federal law.
Yeah.
So
I can see that. And there's probably just a lot more interstate stuff going on in Kenosha just because you're right there.
Yeah. So. It's probably not even a long distance call. So, all right. A couple of years go by, March 1953. Police find a knocked out man. And in trying to figure out where the knocked out man came from, they stumbled upon a gambling operation inside an apartment. In there were several people, including Carl Scola, whose nickname is Cookie. Cookie Scola. Squeaky is in there, and a man with the nickname Sure Shot.
Wow, they do have some awesome nicknames, man.
Yeah. Around 1955, he joined American Motors, where he was the chief loading and receiving steward. I've never worked in an auto factory, so I don't necessarily know what that means. But American Motors is a major employer in Kenosha. At least was,
yeah,
because they don't exist anymore. But they were a major employer in Kenosha. So it's not uncommon for many people that we're going to talk about in Kenosha having some connection to American Motors.
Mm-hmm.
October 1963, police broke up a poker game with 11 men playing, and they were fined $50 each. Included in this group, Squeaky, Peter Scola, Ralph Macero, John Scripanti, Frank Volpentesta, Herb Brandeis. I mean, there's all kinds of people. These are names that are not really important, but they're kind of regulars who get picked up in Kenosha. A Kenosha County Sheriff's deputy advised the FBI in February 1965 that Squeaky was involved in a horse book at American Motors, Matera had formerly been a steward, but was now employed in Department 842 at American Motors, which is the receiving department. A horse book, if that's not clear, it means he's a bookie for horse races.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I always think that's weird, like, because they say like he runs a book, and like I know what that means, but if you're tuning in for the first time and you're like he runs a book,
what is that?
Like that's these, like, in other words, you know what a bookie is. If you're a bookie, you run a book.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's
just kind of weird dialect that I guess we don't normally hear.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. An informant spoke with the FBI in April 1965. He said Squeaky had been spending his evening hours on Kenosha's west side at Louis Greco's restaurant, and despite being married, he had a girlfriend. Oh. Greco, by the way, was known to be mixed up with what was commonly called the West Side Crew. And the West Side Crew is essentially Kenosha's version of the Mafia.
Okay.
Strictly speaking, Kenosha didn't have a mafia because they weren't Sicilian. They were Calabrese. They were from, like, the boot part of Italy. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess all of Italy's a boot, but like the heel, you know, the heel of the boot,
the bottom of the boot,
bottom of the boot, and like yeah. So technically, like, if you are under that definition that to be mafia you have to be Sicilian, well then they're not mafia. But it was a very similar setup.
Did they call themselves a mafia?
They did not.
Okay.
They did not. I don't know if they even had a name for themselves, but generally, yeah, they were referred to as West Side Crew. And I don't know if they gave themselves that name. I don't feel like they did. But everybody kind of knew what that meant.
Okay.
An informant told the FBI that Squeaky's horsebook operations were independent and that he had no connection to any one specific hoodlum. Any layoff bets he did would be through anyone who would take them and not a specific person. Meaning that he's not part of a wider network of gamblers here. So if he's involved with the West Side Crew or the guys in Milwaukee, it's not obvious because he's not in that hierarchy of how you manage the money.
So he probably is working with the West Side Crew, but it's more or less on a one-off situation where he might go and say, I got some bets here, and then works with them to get, I don't know how this whole gambling thing works. Or I guess he could just be doing it completely independent, right?
They are alleging that he's completely independent, which seems unlikely, but I don't know. Maybe Kenosha didn't crack down on it the way that Milwaukee did. Because in Milwaukee, if you were an independent bookie, Frank Ballestri wasn't going to tolerate that. He was going to at least take a cut from you if you're going to try to be independent. Maybe Kenosha was more lenient. I don't know. I can't imagine they would be, but maybe. He had to appear before Judge Zevers August 6, 1965. He was charged with gambling stemming from a John Doe probe that had been in Kenosha looking into gambling. And he had a preliminary hearing, which was scheduled to be August 16th. That comes along. He has his preliminary hearing for commercial gambling. His attorney is Dominic Frenzy, which that jumps out at you.
Heard that name a couple times, huh?
Yeah, because he's known as like the mob attorney in Milwaukee. Kind of odd that he's the attorney in Kenosha. I'm sure there's other attorneys you could get in Kenosha, but he's definitely knows how to defend gamblers, so that's not unusual. Charged along with Squeaky were Cookie Scola and Dante Cardinale, and Dante does not have a cool nickname. The prosecutor called 4 witnesses who testified they'd played poker for money in the apartment over Dante's tavern. There was a barber who said he started his gambling nights at the Eagles Club, but if he was getting hooked on gambling that day and not winning, he would venture over to the apartment. The barber said that the Eagles game, the game at the Eagles Club, would have a $50 pot, and they would rotate dealers, whereas the apartment did not have a rotating dealer. So there was an actual house dealer involved.
Okay.
Which this is not. It sounds like really petty, But this is like how to distinguish between like a friendly game and a game where someone's actually like profiting off of it.
So when they say that you have a rotating dealer, that they're suggesting that the players, one of them takes on the dealing.
Yes.
It's not like the company, like whoever's running the game is bringing multiple dealers in. It's
Correct.
just that one of the players is the dealer.
Yes. It's not like each time they show up to play, there's a different guy dealing. No, it's like these guys all sit in a circle, they play a hand, then the next guy in the circle deals.
Becomes the dealer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So nobody profits. I mean, someone's going to go home with a little more money than they came because that's how poker works. But nobody is taking a cut off the top of it.
Yeah.
The preliminary hearing was enough to bind him over for trial. But even before that, they said, "Hey, we're gonna bring out more witnesses." So they actually extended the preliminary hearing to another day, where they brought out more witnesses who talked about things that they saw there. The people who knew about the game but weren't invited because it was upstairs above a tavern. So they're like, "Hey, we're in this tavern. We know there's a game up there. I never get asked up. Boo." Yeah. One guy said that he was invited but never actually played because he was told that he shouldn't show up unless he brought at least $100. And which doesn't sound like a lot, but I did that little conversion, and $100 in 1965 is actually pretty close to 1,000 in 2024.
So that's a pretty significant amount of money.
Yeah, when you say, "Oh, you better bring 100," like, that's not like a small game, but it's not huge. But when you say you better bring 1,000,
that's getting much bigger.
Yeah. So yeah, like if someone told me that don't show up to my game if you don't bring 1,000, I might not show up to that game.
Well, I can tell you I'm not showing up to that game.
Yeah. So it's bigger than it sounds because the numbers are vastly inflated now.
Mm-hmm.
There was a vice officer named William Lee who said that he had seen a poker table and chairs there and asked Dante Cardinelli to remove them, but he never actually saw gambling in progress. So the vice cop knew what was going on. He just I just never saw it happen. Squeaky and Cookie were bound over for trial. Dante Cardinelli was let go. Despite being above his tavern, there was little to connect him to the gambling directly, which seems a little unusual, but I mean, technically speaking, if it's the apartment's in another person's name, I guess you're not necessarily going to blame the tavern owner.
Mm-hmm.
If I have an apartment above a business, I mean, I'm pretty sure Dante Cardinelli knows what's going on here, but the business doesn't necessarily know what I'm doing in that apartment.
Right.
Dominic Frenzy said, because a few fellows from American Motors couldn't afford to join the Eagles, the Elks, or the Country Club, they went to this place to play cards, and they got hit with felony charges. The John Doe tried to get at City Hall and wound up getting some poor, broken-down gambling charges. It was also pointed out that both Squeaky and Cookie were allegedly card dealers on occasion, but there was nothing to suggest that they were profiting from this or taking a cut. In fact, some witnesses had said that any time there was extra money in the pot, it was taken to buy sandwiches and beers for the group.
Mm-hmm.
So Frenzy's coming forward here, and he's this is not really a defense, but he's trying to put it in the context where, like, hey, we've established there's gambling at the Eagles Club. You're not going after the Eagles Club. And he's also saying, like, this came out of the John Doe investigation. That was, you were looking into gambling, but you were really trying to look for corruption in politics and law enforcement. And you didn't get that. So instead you charged the low-level gambler guys here. So, like I said, not a defense. Like, if you're charged with a crime and you did the crime, like...
Just pointing out that what you're doing here is kind of shady.
Yeah. Like, this, I think, is more... This is probably not going to sway the judge, but it's probably more for the public to be like, hey, think about this. Like,
yeah. Think what's happening here and how dumb it is.
Yeah, these guys aren't the major criminals that they want you to think they are.
And we may have talked about this in another episode because we talk about Dominic Frenzy all the time. But
yes,
do we know any history of was Dominic Frenzy himself a gambler?
I don't believe so.
Because what you read there just made it sound like he's very, very pro gambling.
No,
Which, I mean, obviously he's a defense attorney, so that's kind of what his job is. But at the same time, it seems like just something in the wording you said just jumped out at me, like he thinks this is stupid. You know what I mean?
Well, he never was caught gambling. I don't know of him ever gambling. He's defended many gamblers, and especially during this time period when like the John Doe hearings are happening in different places and cracking down on gambling, which, as I say, is kind of like not necessarily what they were set up to do, but kind of what came out of them. And some of these guys are definitely mob guys. Mm-hmm. So his connection there is obvious. And some of these guys aren't necessarily mob guys, but I think he's just kind of the go-to guy for defending these kind of gambling charges. But I don't know that he himself really is that way. I don't want to misquote him because I don't have the notes in front of me. But I actually think there's been something where he said he didn't even really like gambling or wasn't in favor of gambling. Mm-hmm. But it's, but despite that, it's a dumb charge. Like, he knows it's a dumb charge, and he's, it not necessarily, I shouldn't even say it's a dumb charge, but the way that this is done.
They're reaching. They're reaching for something, right? They're
reaching for something. And the newspapers went along with this because there'd be an article every time that somebody got arrested. They'd have their preliminary hearing. They'd have their follow-up court date. The newspapers covered this. And today, that's not going to happen. This would not be considered newsworthy at all. So there was and we've talked about that before. There was something about the way that the society viewed gambling then that they don't do now.
Yeah.
Where it was like, oh, this is the news.
Right.
There's a gambler here.
Yeah, and I think it was, I mean, I didn't live in that era, but I just feel like it was one of those things that like people were afraid of. Like they thought it was ruining the world or something.
Yeah.
Whereas like it was the video games of that time or social media of that time.
Yeah.
Where people are like, this is just corrupting our world.
That could be.
Feeling.
That could be. And I mean, like, I'm not going to go off on a major sidetrack here, but I mean, obviously gambling does have some bad parts.
Right,
to it.
right.
Like, people have some gambling problems. So, like, it's not the most innocent thing in the world either sometimes. But regardless. The FBI by this point had opened up a file on Squeaky. They checked into his phone records like they do. And they found that he was in contact with a man named William Burton Hull of Las Vegas. Hull was a dealer at the Horseshoe in Vegas. He was 58 years old, originally from Patterson, Louisiana. I have no idea what his connection was to Squeaky. Mm-hmm. So I just throw that in there because it's interesting that he apparently knows this guy in Vegas, but I don't know why he knows this guy in Vegas. I'm not sure what the link is, and if he's using the guy in Vegas to get the odds or to place bets, that's where the FBI would be really concerned. Mm-hmm. So, but nothing ever comes of this, so I don't know. January 1966, while this trial is dragging on, Squeaky's bartender license was up for renewal. Other licenses were renewed without comment, but his passed on a 50-50 vote. Apparently, if you 50-50, it automatically rolls over to an approval.
Okay.
But yeah, they were discussing it, and they're like, I don't know, this guy's getting some bad press right now, but it ends up going through. And I'm not even sure where he's tending bar because he's an American Motors employee. but maybe he puts in a few hours at Dante's Tavern or something.
Mm-hmm. So this license is not for per se a bar, but it's just for him to be able to be a bartender.
Yeah, like this is not his major occupation. In April 1966, arraignment was supposed to happen for Squeaky for keeping a gambling place, and a bunch of other alleged commercial gamblers, including William Sanick, Frank Januzzi, Joseph Pfeiffer, Albert Albana, all coming out of the John Doe probe, most of which having nothing to do with each other. They just all came out of the same probe. Judge Eugene Baker rescheduled because the transcript of the preliminary hearing was not ready. Defense attorney Dominic Frenzy entered a series of motions seeking dismissal, and they were all denied, and the trial was set for June 20th. Squeaky got out of it. He switched his plea to guilty. He paid a $500 fine and said, I'm done. Which, again, based on our earlier adjustment. $500 is more like $5,000. So this is like not a slap on the wrist fine.
Yeah.
This is serious fine.
And can you just imagine hearing about somebody who gets a $5,000 fine today for gambling?
Yeah.
It's just, I just can't see that.
It sounds pretty bad.
Mm.
But yeah, and I don't think it helped him that all these cases are coming out of the John Doe, and most of them, like I said, have nothing to do with each other. They just all kind of came out of the same thing. Like, of these guys, like, I know that he was on occasion caught with Joe Pfeiffer. So, like, he knows Joe Pfeiffer, but I don't know that that means that they're working together.
Mm-hmm.
Albert Albana, I don't really know that he knows. He probably knows him casually. But Albert Albana is actually connected to the Milwaukee mob. Like, he's not a high-level guy. He's usually identified as like a doorman at gambling clubs. So he's nobody major. But he does come up as a Milwaukee mob-connected guy. He was a suspect in the Tony Burnett murder in 1963.
Mm-hmm.
So just having his name in the same news article as you already doesn't help you.
Yeah.
So I can see why he got, because I feel like he could have beat these charges. So, but apparently he felt it was better just to pay his way out.
Mm-hmm. Well, then he probably made enough money gambling that he could do that. I mean, or being a bookie, I should say. So
yeah. So that's pretty much the end of him. Like, this is really it. It's like he's this gambler. Like, we know that he's caught in gambling raids. We know that he's occasionally a dealer at a poker game. He's not this major figure, but they crack down hard on him. The FBI looks into him, the local police, the John Doe, they all look into him, end up making him pay this fine. But most of the time, like, he seems like a really nice, just normal guy. Nobody's ever claimed that he's violent or involved in anything, super sinister.
And does he continue to pop up in gambling after this, or does this seem like it's the end of his gambling days?
This actually seems to be about the end of it.
I mean, I would assume that if somebody fined me $5,000 for gambling, I would probably quit too.
I'm not saying he never gambled again, but he definitely seemed to be more cautious about it if he was.
Yeah, I mean, because you list it like 4 different times where things were raided and busted, and he was there.
Yeah.
So you would have think if you continued on the path he was on, would have heard about him in something at that point.
Yeah. So 2 follow-ups to this story. One, nothing to do with this at all, but a really interesting side note. January 1968. So he pays this fine in April 1966. January 1968. He has a 19-year-old son, Jim.
Okay.
Jim was driving an ambulance in Vietnam as part of the Vietnam War.
Okay.
Not that he just likes driving ambulances in Vietnam. He was shot in the head, but luckily had his helmet on, which absorbed the impact almost completely. Despite a noticeable dent in the helmet, Jim was knocked out for a moment but took no damage whatsoever. A firefight broke out, killing 1 American and wounding several others. 37 Vietnamese were killed on the spot. So, yeah, nothing to do with crime or gambling, but, like, his son apparently had some adventures.
I just think of that. Can you imagine getting shot, taking your helmet off, and realizing the bullet is in your helmet?
Yeah.
Like, I would be like, dude, I gotta get the hell out of here, man. I'm done. That is way too close. And way too lucky.
Yeah.
So,
and the other follow-up is that later on, and I don't have it written down here, I think it's the 1980s. Could be the 90s, but I think it's the 80s. 2 of his nephews are caught for commercial gambling, but in a big way.
okay.
Like, they're allegedly dealing in, like, millions of dollars of gambling.
Really? So, will we cover that story when it comes?
We will cover that if we ever get to the 1980s, yes.
Oh, okay, yeah, because that's quite a ways away.
Yes, but that's something we will definitely come back to because it's a pretty big deal. And I don't know that there's any link there to the fact that they're his nephews. Like, I don't know that they, were like, hey, uncle, you're a gambler.
And
I don't know that. But I just thought it was interesting when I was doing what I do, where I try to see, like, oh, is this guy related to anybody? And he's really not. That I come across these two nephews who are, turns out to be much bigger gamblers than he was.
And the nephews, I assume, they're not working on any capacity with the mafia. They're just,
I don't know the details
themselves.
of that, so I couldn't give you a firm answer on that at this time.
Okay. Well, everybody's just going to have to wait until like episode 247 and we'll cover that.
Yeah. He also had a niece that married a federal judge.
Huh?
So that was interesting too, but totally unrelated. The guy was a federal judge after this point, so I can't even make any connection to this story. But it's just interesting what you turn up when you're looking into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. A lot of times, a lot of those little things that what the kids do after they, that you discover is sometimes just as interesting as the episode itself.
Yeah.
So
yep. So for most people, like I said, this maybe isn't the most interesting episode. Just take it as another example of how your common average gambler is getting cracked down on hard by law enforcement. If you're a member of his family or, whatever, maybe this is something you weren't super familiar with. It happened in the 60s, so maybe you didn't know. But so maybe you got something out of that. Maybe you have some personal memories and you can kind of tell me, because I get the impression he was actually a really nice guy. He just liked to gamble, and that was frowned upon. But
yeah, and think of how many people were that way, where, they were just a gambler because that's what they liked doing, and at this set point in time, that was something that got you into a lot of trouble and got you wrapped up into the mafia and all this other stuff. So,
and that's the thing. Because he's hanging out in the same places as I say, like the West Side Crew, and the West Side Crew. Some of those guys are some bad guys, but there's nothing indicating that he is at all. Like, if the worst thing he's doing is dealing in a poker game, that's not that bad. I don't know. I've been to poker games. It's not that serious.
So, all right. Well, do you got anything else for this one, or should we wrap her up?
No.
Close out 1965?
Yeah, just like I just said, I think we needed one more 1965, and so this is as good as any to get us moving forward. 66, there's actually going to be a bunch of stuff. We're going to come back, and we're going to finally catch up on Frank Balistrieri and his tax problems.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a big year for that. A few other things that I think are going to be very interesting. So 65 was kind of a low year, but 66 comes back.
And we always like the Frank Balistrieri stories because,
yes.
I don't know. I find it fascinating how well the guy was able to stay out of prison and all that crap. So it's pretty good stuff. So, all right, with that, we'll wrap this episode up. We'll be back next week with a Patreon, 2 weeks with the first 1966 episode. We thank everybody for tuning in. And, Gavin, where can people reach out to you at? I think I've forgotten to do that in the last 10 episodes.
Oh, no. Well, be sure to check out MilwaukeeMafia.com. I post all the show notes on there. So if you want to see all the stuff I'm rambling, and including the parts that I kind of skim over, that's on there. If you want to email me directly, it's MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. And I'm pretty good about getting back to people. Sometimes it takes me a week, but I get to you when I do.
Cool. So then we'll wrap this one up, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia Podcast. Join us next time for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.